Remy Ilona presents statesman Edward Wilmot Blyden to Rabbi Elie Mischel, African Americans, and Caribbeans.
Hello, friends. I hope you all had a good Shabbat rest and a restful Saturday for those who do not observe the Shabbat. I came across this very fantastic article by Rabbi Elie Mischel. It's entitled Black Jewish Relations, Edward Wilmot Blyden's Radical Vision. And I decided to talk about this article and what it actually means to the world, because Biden was a figure that the world should be familiar with. We don't find too many of his kind in the world. I'll read from the article and afterwards I will start a story about Blyden. Edward Wilmot Blyden, crusader against racism. Born as a free black in 1832 in Charlottesville, Amalie, the capital of St. Thomas and the Danish West Indies, Edward Wilmot Blyden witnessed slavery firsthand. St. Thomas was home to the biggest slave market in the Caribbean, and most of the residents of the island were black slaves. Though expected to become a tailor like his father, Blyden was set on becoming a clergyman to help relieve the suffering of the black community. At 18, Blyden moved to New Jersey and applied to the Rutgers Theological College, where he was rejected because of the color of his skin. The traumatic experience embittered Blyden, convincing him that the black community could only achieve equality by returning to their African homeland. After his rejection from Rutgers, Blyden emigrated to Liberia, a new nation established by freed slaves from the Americas, where he became one of the new nation's most accomplished citizens. He served as a clergyman, educator, and diplomat, and most importantly as the leading philosopher of black nationalism. Several of his books, like Vindication of the Negro Race and African Life and Customs, became classics, the foundation upon which all black nationalist thinkers in the 20th century would build. Blyden's nationalist philosophy was a response to the discrimination and degradation that blacks experienced in America. He angrily writes about how he was refused entry to Congress in Washington, D.C. in 1862, even though he was a well-known diplomatic representative of Liberia and was then suspected of being a runaway slave and forbidden from leaving the city by the fugitive slave law. Dehumanizing experiences like this, daily fare for African Americans, was deeply damaging to the dignity of the black community. For Blyden, strengthening the community's pride was critical to their progress and liberation. He insisted that the word Negro always be written with capital letters. Significantly, Blyden did not believe that black pride should come at the expense of other races or religions. He dreamed of a revitalized Africa, serving as a link between the Middle East and Western civilization, a way to destroy race enmities and reconcile nation with nation. Most surprising, however, was Blyden's fascination with another long-suffering race, the Jewish people. Growing up in St. Thomas, Blyden lived in the Jewish neighborhood of Charlotte, Amalie. His friends were primarily Jewish, and their favorite playground was Synagogue Hill, He often visited the synagogue with his friends and later wrote of his admiration of the dignified and meaningful atmosphere of Jewish services. He was enthralled by the stories of the Hebrew Bible and enchanted by the Hebrew language. As an adult, he was driven to master Hebrew, the language of the Bible, in order to refute Christian racists who frequently cited biblical verses to justify their persecution of blacks. Blyden was also fascinated by the history of the Jewish people, repeatedly referring to them in his writings. He even visited the Holy Land, the original home of the Jews, to see Jerusalem and Mount Zion, the joy of the whole earth. Writing a book about his travels from West Africa to Palestine. Like so many others throughout the generations, he was deeply moved by his visit, writing years later that the impression made upon me by the visit to the land of the patriarchs and prophets deepens as the years go by, so that with ever fresh interest and delight, I recur to the study of the language, literature, and history of the Jews. Most incredibly, in 1898, only 1 year after the First Zionist Congress, Blyden published a short, remarkable book entitled The Jewish Question, the fruition of his lifelong fascination with the Jewish people, describing the Jews as a sacred nation and God's chosen people. He praised the faithfulness of the Jewish people to their religion. In sharp contrast to Christian replacement theology, Blyden emphasized the Jewish roots of Christianity and Islam, neither of which could have transformed the world without the spiritual foundation laid by the people of Israel, the world's leaders in religion and morality. Just as important, Blyden viewed Judaism and the Hebrew Bible as anti-racist. Though many Christians distorted the text to support their racist prejudices, a simple Jewish reading of the text clearly rejected the notion of superior and inferior races. Moses' marriage to Zipporah, an Ethiopian woman, and Solomon's marriage to Pharaoh's daughter proved that Judaism and the God of the Jews was colorblind. Blyden frequently cited a verse from Amos in which God says, "To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians, declares God. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Caphtor and the Arameans from Ki." The Hebrew Bible made clear that the Ethiopian is as dear to him as the Israelite. But Blyden did not stop there. He believed that Jews and blacks were bound together by their analogous histories. Both peoples are children of endurance and suffering, brought together by a history of almost identical sorrow and oppression. Both Jews and blacks withstood generations of slavery. The Jews in Egypt and the blacks in the United States. Each race endured generations of persecution, often at the hands of the same perpetrators. And both peoples continued to suffer in Blyden's time, the blacks from lynchings and segregation in the American South, and the Jews from murderous pogroms like those in Kishinev and Setoshowa. Blyden viewed the Jewish people's endurance through centuries of exile and suffering as a model of hope and renewal for his own people. I feel like weeping. Blyden was Israelite. Blyden was Igbo. The beautifulness of his soul made him to have sympathy for the suffering Jewish people. But more than that, Obara, blood also moved him. But with his own identity covered with the term black, separated from Igbo land, this great soul, whose statue should be in lands that statues are welcomed, whose photographs should adorn the halls of Israeli embassies, all over the world, beside the photographs of Theodore Herzl, was a Hebrew. Igbo, Hebrew, Ibri, Ivri are all forms of one word. Igbo, Ibri, Ivri are equivalent to the English language Hebrew. The man's soul was utterly beautiful. Never seen a soul like his. Even though his own people, African Americans and Caribbeans, were walking through the shadow of the valley of death, his heart still went out to another people. In his own estimation and in the estimation of the people and other people. And this heart filled with love went out in love. And speaking to the leaders of the world then, he said the land of Israel should be given to the oppressed Jews in Europe. But as I have pointed out here now, he was not just black, he was Igbo, he was a Hebrew, he was an Israelite. So, Rabbi Elie Mischel, you wrote a fantastic article. Your article nearly brought me to tears. But we should take a step further. We should look more at the people that Blyden left in Africa, the Igbo people. They are Israelites. They are seed of Israel. The God that Blyden was talking about is Chukwu, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Igbos. Chukwu means great God in the Igbo language. The amity, the unity we are looking for, we will find it, but our hearts will be open. If you want to know more about Blyden's native culture, please go to Amazon, look up Igbo and Abraham's DNA. It talks about the Igbo DNA and its connections to the DNA of contemporary Middle Easterners. Look for my name, Remy Ilona. It will guide you to the book. The map used to design this front cover was produced by MyHeritage. It is the map of my DNA study produced by MyHeritage. I'm 100% Igbo. The largest concentration of my genes are found aligning with the genes of contemporary Middle Easterners. Pick up the book and look at what Blyden's DNA would have looked like. For in-depth studies of the culture of Blyden, look for the Hebrew Igbo republics, the place from which he was wrenched away. He ended up an African American stroke Caribbean who relocated to Liberia. You want to know more about the connections, the ancestral connections between the Jewish people, the Igbo people, and many, many African Americans and Caribbeans. Open up your heart. Read this book as well. Look up the name Remy Ilona on Amazon. Get copies of an African American history. Read it with an open mind. Truth brings true reconciliation. Thank you. On this note, I decide to take a pause, and I will always take your questions by email, on Facebook. Thank you. And if you are moved, subscribe.